August 3rd, 1981. 6 hours past midnight. 13,000 air traffic controllers walk off the job. 48 hours later, 11,000 of them are fired. And the American worker never recovered. This isn't a story about an airline strike. This is a story about the moment the government chose corporations over workers. The moment unions died. The moment your salary stopped growing while everything else got more expensive. 45 years later, you're still paying for it. This is the story of how one decision in 1980 broke the promise that hard work equals a good life. How the middle class was dismantled on purpose. And why your generation can't afford what your parents had 6 months earlier. January 20th, 1981. Ronald Reagan becomes president. In his inaugural address, he says 9 words that will change everything. Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. For 50 years, the government had protected workers, enforced labor laws, strengthened unions, built the middle class. Reagan promised to end that. And he had help: wealthy donors, corporate lobbyists, economists who believed workers were paid too much. Within 8 months, they'll prove they mean it. The air traffic controllers had a problem. Their equipment was obsolete. Radar screens from the 1950s. Radio systems that failed daily. Stress levels so high controllers were burning out at 40 years old. They asked for better pay, better equipment, earlier retirement. The government said no. So on August 3rd, 1981, 13,000 controllers walked out. Not for greed, for safety. Federal law made it illegal for government workers to strike. They knew the risk. They walked anyway. And Reagan was waiting. 48 hours after the strike begins. 11 a.m. The White House Rose Garden. Reagan steps to the microphone. The message is simple and brutal. They are in violation of the law. If they do not report for work within 48 hours, they have forfeited their jobs and will be terminated. No negotiation. No compromise. 48 hours or you're fired. For 50 years, presidents had negotiated with striking workers. Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, even Richard Nixon. Reagan chose differently. This wasn't about air traffic controllers. This was a signal to every worker in America. 2 days later, August 5th, 1981, 11,000 controllers refused to return. Reagan fires all of them, not suspended, not fined, fired, and banned from federal employment for life. The ban won't be lifted for 12 years. These weren't criminals. They were workers with an average of 10 years of experience, asking for safer working conditions. The government replaced them with military controllers and hastily trained recruits. Flights were delayed. Airspace was restricted. The system nearly collapsed. It didn't matter. Reagan made his point. Strike and you lose everything. But here's what nobody tells you about that moment. The air traffic controllers weren't random workers. They were Reagan's people. The Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, PATCO, had endorsed Reagan for president, one of the only unions to back a Republican. They thought he'd help them. He destroyed them instead. This is where it hits your life. Within 1 year, corporate America learns the lesson. If the president will fire his own supporters, corporations can do anything. In 1982, Phelps Dodge Copper Company faces a strike. Instead of negotiating, they hire permanent replacements. Fire everyone who walked out. Greyhound does the same in 1983. Continental Airlines in 1983. Hormel in 1985. The pattern spreads. Strikes that used to end in compromise now end in replacement workers and broken unions. Before Reagan, replacing striking workers was rare. Companies feared public backlash, government pressure, union power. After Reagan, it becomes standard practice. The strike weapon labor's only leverage becomes suicidal. Here's the number that explains everything. 50% to 6%. In 1980, 50% of American workers were union members. By 2025, 6%. That's not an accident. That's a systematic dismantling. In the 30 years before Reagan, union membership grew. Wages grew with it. The middle class expanded. One income could buy a house, raise kids, save for retirement. In the 30 years after Reagan, unions collapsed. Wages stagnated. The middle class disappeared. Reagan didn't fire 11,000 air traffic controllers. He fired the American dream for 100 million workers. But firing the controllers was just the opening move. The real transformation came next. Changes to tax law, labor law, and financial regulation that guaranteed what came after. And it started with a promise. The same promise you've heard your entire life. Cut taxes on the wealthy. The money will trickle down. Everyone will prosper. This is the part they don't talk about. 3 weeks after firing the controllers, August 1981, Congress passes Reagan's tax cuts. The top tax rate drops from 70% to 50%. Later, it falls to 28%. The promise: if rich people keep more money, they'll invest it, build factories, create jobs, raise wages. That was the theory. Here's what actually happened. Between 1980 and 2020, worker productivity increased 77%. If wages had kept pace, the average worker would make $102,000 a year instead of $50,000. $52,000 per year. Per worker. For 40 years. Where did that money go? To the top. In 1980, the average CEO made 40 times what their workers made. By 2020, 320 times. Not because CEOs got 320 times better, because the rules changed. Reagan's tax cuts didn't trickle down. They concentrated up. But here's the part that guaranteed it would never reverse. Reagan didn't just cut taxes. He gutted enforcement. The National Labor Relations Board, the agency that protects workers' right to organize, had its budget slashed. Staff cut by 1/3. Cases took years to resolve. Companies learned they could fire union organizers. Close factories that voted for unions. Threaten workers who tried to organize. The penalties were tiny. The enforcement was toothless. The message was clear. Workers have rights on paper, not in practice. By 1985, the transformation is complete. Corporations report record profits. Executive pay soars. Stock prices triple. Workers' wages? Flat. The economy grows. Productivity rises. Corporate profits explode. But the workers who created that wealth don't see a dime. And when they ask why, they're told, the market has decided your labor isn't worth more. This wasn't the market. This was policy. Here's what this looked like for real people. A factory worker in Ohio, 20 years with the company, union job, $42,000 a year in 1980. That's $72,000 in today's money. Enough for a house, a car, a stay-at-home spouse, 3 kids, and retirement savings. By 2000, his factory closes. Moves to Mexico, where labor is cheaper. He's 55 years old. Too young to retire. Too old to retrain. He finds work at Walmart. $12 an hour. No benefits. No pension. No retirement. He works until he dies. This isn't one story. This is millions of stories. But here's the question nobody asks. Why did corporations suddenly have the power to move factories overseas, break unions, and slash wages? Because in 1980, the government stopped protecting workers and started protecting capital. This is the hinge. Before 1980, companies needed permission to close factories. Unions could stop them. Communities could fight back. After 1980, corporations had unlimited freedom, and workers had nothing. By 1989, the pattern is set. Productivity up, wages flat, profits soaring, unions dying. And every time workers complain, they're told the same thing. Work harder, get more education, learn to compete. But compete against what? Against workers in countries making $2 a day? Against corporations that pay no taxes? Against a system designed to transfer wealth upward? The game was rigged in 1980, and every year since, the gap has widened. This is where your life changed, and you didn't even know it. Your parents bought a house on one income. You can't afford rent on two. Your parents had pensions. You have a 401k that might survive the next crash. Your parents retired at 62. You'll work until you die. That's not because you're lazy. That's because the system changed in 1980, and it changed on purpose. But why? Why destroy unions, suppress wages, and hollow out the middle class? What happens when you concentrate all the wealth at the top and leave nothing for workers? You get 2008. You get billionaires who own more than half the country. You get a generation that can't afford children, homes, or futures. You get the world we live in now. But that's not where this story ends. That's where it accelerates. Because the same people who broke the unions in 1980 came back in 1999 with an even bigger plan. What happens when workers have no power and banks have unlimited greed? August 13th, 1981. 10 days after firing 11,000 workers. Congress passes the largest tax cut in American history, $750 billion. Over 5 years, almost all of it going to the wealthy. The promise was simple: cut taxes on the rich, and prosperity will trickle down to everyone else. 45 years later, we're still waiting for the trickle. The theory had a name: supply-side economics, also called Reaganomics, also called Trickle-Down economics. The idea: if you let rich people keep more money, they'll invest it, build factories, hire workers, create prosperity for everyone. It sounded reasonable. It was designed to. But here's what nobody told you. It was based on a napkin drawing. 1974, a restaurant in Washington. Arthur Laffer, an economist, meets with Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. Laffer grabs a napkin, draws a curve. The Laffer Curve. It claims that cutting taxes will increase government revenue because economic growth will explode. Cut taxes. Get more money. Everyone wins. Cheney and Rumsfeld loved it. Corporate donors loved it. Reagan loved it. One problem: it wasn't true. Every serious economist said it wouldn't work. Reagan's own budget director, David Stockman, called it a Trojan horse, a way to cut taxes for the rich while pretending to help everyone. But Reagan didn't care about economists. He cared about donors, and donors wanted their taxes cut. So in August 1981, Congress passed the Economic Recovery Tax Act. The top tax rate dropped from 70% to 50%. Rich people celebrated. Workers were told to wait for the prosperity to trickle down. It never did. Here's what actually happened. Between 1980 and 1990, the economy grew. Corporations made record profits. The stock market soared. But worker wages? Flat. In 1980, the average worker earned $25,000 a year. That's $43,000 in today's money. In 1990, the average worker earned $28,000. Adjusted for inflation, that's still $43,000. 10 years of economic growth, zero wage growth. The trickle-down never trickled, but the wealthy, they did fine. Between 1980 and 1990, the richest 1% saw their incomes double. The richest 0.1% saw their incomes triple. CEOs who made 40 times their workers' pay in 1980 made 100 times by 1990. The wealth didn't trickle down. It vacuumed up. This wasn't a side effect. This was the plan. David Stockman, Reagan's budget director, admitted it years later. In a 1981 interview, he said, "The hard part of the supply-side tax cut is dropping the top rate from 70 to 50%. The rest of it is a Trojan horse to bring down the top rate. Translation: the tax cuts for the middle class were cover. The real goal was cutting taxes for the rich. And it worked. By 1986, Reagan pushed through another tax cut. The top rate dropped to 28%. In 6 years, taxes on the wealthy were cut by 60%. Taxes on workers stayed the same. In some cases, went up. But cutting taxes created a problem. The government started running massive deficits. In 1980, the national debt was $1 trillion. By 1989, it was $3 trillion. Reagan tripled the national debt in 8 years. The party that claimed to care about deficits exploded the deficit to pay for tax cuts. And when the bill came due, they didn't raise taxes on the wealthy. They cut programs for the poor. This is where it gets worse. To pay for the tax cuts, Reagan slashed spending, but not on defense. Defense spending doubled. He cut welfare, cut food stamps, cut job training, cut education, cut health care for the poor. The wealthy got tax cuts. The poor got cuts. Reagan called it shrinking government. It was wealth redistribution, upward, but the tax cuts were just the beginning. Reagan's real gift to the wealthy was deregulation. For 50 years, the government had regulated corporations, limited mergers, enforced antitrust laws, protected workers and consumers. Reagan promised to end that, and he kept his promise. In 1982, Reagan appointed people who didn't believe in regulation to run regulatory agencies. The head of the Environmental Protection Agency didn't believe in environmental protection. The head of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration didn't believe in workplace safety rules. The head of the Securities and Exchange Commission didn't believe in regulating Wall Street. It wasn't incompetence. It was strategy. You can't dismantle the government from outside. You do it from inside. Within 2 years, enforcement of labor laws dropped by 40%. Companies that broke the law faced smaller fines, fewer inspections, longer delays. Corporations learned. Break the rules, nothing happens. Fire workers for organizing, small fine. Ignore safety regulations, small fine. Pollute the environment, small fine. The cost of breaking the law became cheaper than following it, and corporations responded predictably. But the biggest deregulation came in finance. For 50 years, banks had been boring. They took deposits, made loans, paid interest. They couldn't gamble, couldn't merge into giants, couldn't create exotic financial products. Reagan changed that. He started the process that would culminate in 1999 with the repeal of Glass-Steagall. But the groundwork was laid in the 1980s. Let banks merge. Let them gamble. Let them grow too big to fail. What could go wrong? By 1985, the transformation is visible. Corporations are merging into giants. Hostile takeovers, leveraged buyouts. Wall Street isn't building companies. It's dismantling them. Investors buy companies with borrowed money, load them with debt, strip their assets, fire their workers, sell the pieces. Workers lose jobs. Communities lose factories. But investors make billions. This wasn't creative destruction. It was asset stripping. And it was legal, because Reagan made it legal. Here's the human cost. A steel mill in Pennsylvania. 1,500 workers. Union jobs. $30 an hour with benefits. In 1985, a Wall Street firm buys the company in a leveraged buyout. Loads it with debt. Extracts the pension fund. Closes the mill. Sells the land. 1,500 workers lose their jobs. The town collapses. The pension is gone. The investors make $50 million. This happened thousands of times in the 1980s. Reagan called it economic dynamism. Workers called it theft. But here's what makes the tax cuts unforgivable. They didn't even work as promised. The theory was, cut taxes, grow the economy, everyone benefits. The economy grew, but only the wealthy benefited. Between 1980 and 1990, the economy grew 33%. Corporate profits grew 60%. Worker wages grew 0%. If trickle-down economics worked, everyone's income should have grown. Instead, all the growth went to the top 10%. This isn't a theory failure. This is theft. By 1987, even some Republicans admit the tax cuts failed. The deficit is exploding. Infrastructure is crumbling. Workers are suffering. So Congress raises taxes. Twice, in 1982 and 1984, but not on the wealthy. On workers, Social Security taxes go up. Payroll taxes go up. The poor pay more. The wealthy, their rates stay low. Reagan cut taxes for the rich, exploded the deficit, then raised taxes on the poor to pay for it. This wasn't economics. It was class warfare. But here's the question no one asks. If trickle-down economics doesn't work, why do we keep doing it? Because it's not designed to grow the economy. It's designed to transfer wealth. And it's been working perfectly for 45 years. Every Republican president since Reagan has cut taxes on the wealthy. Bush in 1988. Bush again in 2001. Trump in 2017. The promise is always the same. This time it will trickle down. It never does. By 1989, the pattern is locked in. Tax cuts for the rich. Deregulation for corporations. Austerity for workers. Repeat every decade. And every decade, the gap widens. The wealthy get wealthier. Workers get poorer. The government goes into debt. Then the wealthy blame the debt on workers getting too much. It's the perfect scam. This is why your parents could afford a house, and you can't. In 1980, the average house cost 3 times the average salary. In 2025, it costs 7 times. Wages stayed flat. Prices doubled. Taxes on the wealthy dropped by 60%. You're not failing. The system is designed to make you fail, but the tax cuts were just the economic foundation. The real damage came from what they enabled, the complete destruction of workers' ability to fight back. Because when you fire 11,000 union members and cut taxes on corporations, what happens to every other union in America? September 1981. 1 month after Reagan fires 11,000 air traffic controllers. Union membership starts dropping. It won't stop for 45 years. In 1980, 50% of American workers belong to unions. By 2025, 6%. That's not a decline. That's an extermination. And it was designed. Here's what happened after PATCO. Every corporation in America watched Reagan fire his own supporters. Fire workers who broke the law. Fire people who thought they had power. A message was clear. Unions can't protect you anymore. And corporations responded immediately. 1982. Phelps Dodge Copper Company in Arizona. 1,300 miners strike. Not for higher pay, for maintaining their current pay. The company was demanding wage cuts, health benefit cuts, pension cuts. The miners said no, walked out. Phelps Dodge didn't negotiate. They hired permanent replacement workers, scabs, strikebreakers, people willing to cross picket lines for $13 an hour. The strike lasted 18 months. 18 months of picket lines. 18 months of families on food stamps. 18 months of hoping the company would negotiate. The company never negotiated. In 1984, the strike collapsed. The union was decertified. The strikers were blacklisted. 1,300 workers lost everything. Their jobs, their pensions, their futures. The replacements kept their jobs. The company kept its profits. And every other corporation learned you can break a strike by replacing the workers. This is where it accelerates. 1983, Greyhound bus lines. 12,000 drivers strike. The company hires replacements. The strike ends. The drivers lose. 1983. Continental Airlines. 11,000 workers strike. The company files for bankruptcy, voids union contracts, hires replacements. The strike ends. The workers lose. 1985. Hormel meatpacking plant in Minnesota. 1,500 workers strike. The company hires replacements. The strike ends. The workers lose. Between 1981 and 1990, every major strike in America ends the same way. Workers strike. Companies hire replacements. Unions collapse. Before Reagan, this was rare. After Reagan, it's standard. The strike the only weapon workers had becomes a death sentence. But replacement workers were just one tactic. The real destruction came from something quieter, something legal. Companies discovered they could just close factories where workers voted for unions. Not because the factory was unprofitable, because it was unionized. 1984. A General Motors plant in Fremont, California, votes to unionize. 2 years later, the plant closes, moves to Mexico. 1986. A textile mill in South Carolina votes to unionize. 1 year later, the mill closes, moves to Indonesia. The pattern repeats hundreds of times in the 1980s. Workers vote for a union. The factory closes. The message is unmistakable. Organize, lose your job. Here's the number: 1 in 5. In the 1980s, 1 in 5 union organizing campaigns resulted in the company closing the facility. Not threatening to close, actually closing. Thousands of factories, hundreds of thousands of jobs. This wasn't market forces. This was retaliation, and it was legal. But here's what makes it unforgivable. The government agency supposed to protect workers. Right to organize, the National Labor Relations Board did nothing. Reagan had gutted its budget, cut its staff, appointed board members who hated unions. When workers filed complaints about illegal firings, the cases took 3 years to resolve. By then, the factory was in Mexico. The union drive was dead. The workers were scattered. The law protected workers on paper, not in practice. And corporations learned they could break every rule because penalties were meaningless. Fire a union organizer? Maximum penalty. Back pay and a notice on the wall. Not jail time, not massive fines. Back pay. An organizer makes $30,000 a year. Fire them. Fight the case for 3 years. If you lose, pay $90,000 plus legal costs. Versus pay higher wages to every worker for 30 years. The math is simple. Breaking the law is cheaper than following it. And every corporation started doing the math. By 1987, tactics that were once illegal become standard. Captive audience meetings where management tells workers unions will destroy the company. One-on-one meetings where supervisors threaten workers who support unions. Hiring union-busting consultants who teach companies how to intimidate without technically breaking the law. An entire industry emerges. Anti-union consultants. They charge $10,000 per day. Companies pay it willingly because breaking a union saves millions. Here's what this looked like for a real worker. Linda, age 32, works at a Walmart distribution center in Arkansas. She makes $11 an hour, no benefits, inconsistent schedule, forced overtime. She and her coworkers try to organize a union. 1 week later, Walmart closes the entire distribution center. 400 workers lose their jobs. Walmart says it's for restructuring. The timing is coincidental. Linda files a complaint with the National Labor Relations Board. 4 years later, the case is still pending. Linda is working at Target for $10 an hour. The union never happened. But the destruction of unions wasn't just about strikes and organizing. It was structural. Reagan's deregulation allowed companies to do things that had been illegal for 50 years. Outsource jobs overseas. Hire temporary workers instead of full-time employees. classify workers as independent contractors to avoid paying benefits. Each tactic weakened unions, because unions can't organize workers who don't officially exist. By 1990, the transformation is complete. Unions that once protected 40 million workers now protect 14 million. Wages that had grown for 30 years are now flat. Benefits that were standard pensions, healthcare, paid vacation become rare. Companies that once negotiated with unions now dictate terms. Take it or leave. And if you leave, there are 10 people waiting for your job. This is why your job is worse than your parents' job. Your parents had pensions. You have a 401k that might crash. Your parents had health care. You have a high deductible plan that costs $600 a month. Your parents had paid vacation. You have unlimited PTO that you're too scared to use. Your parents retired at 62. You'll work until 70. That's not because companies can't afford it. It's because unions can't force them to. But here's the question nobody asks. Why does union membership collapse in America, but not in other countries? In 1980, union membership in America and Germany are roughly equal, 40%. By 2020, America is at 6%. Germany is at 35%. Same capitalism, same globalization, different results. The difference? Germany protected unions. America destroyed them. This was a choice, and the choice had consequences. Between 1980 and 2020, worker productivity in America increased 77%. In Germany, it increased 68%. American workers became more productive. German workers became slightly less productive. But German workers' wages went up. American workers' wages stayed flat. Why? German workers had unions to bargain for their share of productivity gains. American workers had nothing. Here's the theft in one number: $50 trillion. Between 1975 and 2018, $50 trillion shifted from workers to owners. That's not an estimate. That's a calculation by the Rand Corporation. $50 trillion. That's $400,000 per working family. If workers had gotten their share of productivity gains, the average worker would make $102,000 instead of $50,000. But unions were destroyed, so workers got nothing. By 2025, the pattern is locked. 6% union membership, wages that haven't grown in 40 years, benefits that keep shrinking. And when workers complain, they're told, "Be grateful you have a job." But here's the part they don't mention. The same corporations who destroyed unions spent millions lobbying for the next phase. Because destroying workers' power in factories wasn't enough. They wanted to deregulate the entire financial system. Let banks gamble with workers' savings. Let corporations buy back stock instead of raising wages. And in 1999, they succeeded. What happens when workers have no power and corporations have no limits? 1981. The average American worker makes $25,000 a year. 45 years later, adjusted for inflation, they make the same amount. Zero growth. For 45 years. But productivity didn't freeze. Profits didn't freeze. CEO pay didn't freeze. Only your salary froze. And it happened the moment unions lost their power. Here's the math that explains everything. Between 1980 and 2025, American workers became 77% more productive. They produced 77% more goods, 77% more value, 77% more profit for their companies. If wages had kept pace with productivity, the average worker would make $102,000 a year. They make $50,000, $52,000 per year. Missing for 45 years. Where did that money go? To the top? In 1980, the average CEO made 40 times what their workers made. By 2025, 320 times. Not because CEOs became 320 times better at their jobs. Because the rules changed. and workers had no power to fight back. But this wasn't just about CEO pay. This was about a fundamental shift in how corporations distributed money. Before 1980, when companies made more profit, everyone benefited. Workers got raises, communities got investment, shareholders got modest returns. After 1980, profits went one direction, up. Here's how they did it. First, they stopped giving raises tied to inflation. For 30 years, union contracts guaranteed automatic cost of living adjustments. Inflation goes up 3%, wages go up 3%. After unions collapsed, those adjustments disappeared. Inflation kept rising. Wages didn't. Your dollar buys less every year. Your paycheck stays the same. That's not economics. That's theft by erosion. Second, they killed pensions. In 1980, 60% of workers had defined benefit pensions. You work 30 years, you retire with a guaranteed monthly check for life. By 2025, 3% have pensions. Everyone else has a 401k, a retirement account that depends on the stock market not crashing. You take all the risk. The company saves millions. This is where it hits your future. Here's what that shift cost you. A pension pays 60% of your final salary every month until you die. If you made $50,000 in your final year, you'd get $30,000 per year in retirement. A 401k? You save what you can. Hope the market doesn't crash. Hope you don't live too long. The average 401k balance at retirement? $130,000. At 4% withdrawal rate, that's $5,000 per year. $30,000 versus $5,000. That's the difference between retiring and working until you die. Third, they shredded benefits. In 1980, 80% of workers had employer-paid health insurance. Full coverage. No deductibles. No copays. By 2025, employers pay a shrinking share. Workers pay more. Coverage covers less. The average worker now pays $600 per month for health insurance. $7,200 per year. That's 14% of a $50,000 salary. Gone before you see a doctor. Your grandparents had free health care. You have bankruptcy risk. Fourth, they casualized work. In 1980, most workers were full-time employees. Salary, benefits, job security. By 2025, corporations hire tong, contractors, gig workers. Same work, no benefits, no security, no path to full-time. Uber calls drivers partners. Amazon calls warehouse workers associates. They're not partners, they're disposable labor, and it's legal. Because Reagan's deregulation made it legal. Here's the human cost of casualization. James, age 28, has a college degree, works 3 part-time jobs, 15 hours per week at Starbucks, 12 hours delivering for DoorDash, 10 hours at Target. None of the jobs offer benefits. None offer consistent schedules. None pay above $15 per hour. He works 37 hours per week, makes $28,000 per year, has no health insurance, no retirement savings, no stability. He's not lazy. He's working harder than his parents did. But his parents had one full-time union job that paid $45,000 with benefits. James has 3 jobs with nothing. But here's what makes wage stagnation unforgivable. It didn't have to happen. Other countries didn't experience this. Between 1980 and 2020, wages in Germany grew 33%. In France, 38%. In Canada, 27%. In America, 0. Same globalization. Same technology. Same capitalism. Different results. Because other countries protected workers, America chose profits. And it gets worse. The same companies that froze wages spent billions on stock buybacks. Between 1985 and 2025, corporations spent $18 trillion buying their own stock. $18 trillion. That's $54,000 per American worker. Instead of raises, corporations gave money to shareholders. Instead of training, they inflated stock prices. Instead of investing in workers, they enriched executives whose pay was tied to stock performance. Here's how a stock buyback works. A company makes $10 billion in profit. Option 1. Give workers raises. Invest in new equipment. Build new factories. Option 2. Buy back company stock. Reduce shares outstanding. Increase stock price. Make shareholders richer. Corporations choose option 2 every time. Because CEOs are paid in stock, shareholders vote on CEO pay. Workers have no vote. The system is designed to transfer wealth from labor to capital, and it's working perfectly. By 1990, the pattern is set. Productivity rises, profits soar, stock prices triple, your paycheck frozen. You're told, work harder, get more skills, be more valuable. But the problem isn't your value. The problem is the system. You can't negotiate against a corporation that can fire you, replace you, or move your job overseas. You need collective power. You need a union. But unions are gone. This is why everything feels harder than it should. Your parents bought a house at 25. You can't afford rent at 35. Your parents raised 3 kids on 1 income. You struggle with 1 kid on 2 incomes. Your parents retired at 62. You'll work until you die. That's not because houses and kids got more expensive relative to everything else. It's because wages stopped growing while everything else kept rising. Here's the price increase that broke the middle class. Housing. In 1980, the median house cost 3 times median income. Earn $50,000? You can buy a $150,000 house. By 2025, the median house costs 7 times median income. Earn $50,000? You need a $350,000 house. But you can only afford $150,000. Wages didn't double. Housing prices did. You're not failing. The math doesn't work. Education costs followed the same pattern. In 1980, a year of public college cost $1,200. Work a summer job. Pay for school. By 2025, it costs $28,000. Work all summer? You pay for 2 months, so students borrow. $30,000, $60,000, $100,000. They graduate with debt that takes 30 years to repay. Your parents graduated debt-free. You graduate in chains. But here's what they don't tell you. College got more expensive because states cut funding. States cut funding because Reagan cut federal support to states. States had to choose, fund colleges or fund prisons. They chose prisons. Between 1980 and 2020, funding for prisons increased 300%. Funding for colleges decreased 40%. You're paying more because the government chose punishment over education. That's not market forces. That's policy. By 2025, the damage is total. Wages frozen for 45 years. Benefits shredded. Pensions gone. Education unaffordable. Housing out of reach. And when workers complain, they're told, you're entitled. You want too much. You need to compete. But compete against what? Against corporations that pay no taxes? Against automation? Against workers in countries making $2 per day? The game is rigged. And it was rigged in 1980. This is why you can't live the life your parents lived. Not because you're lazy. Not because you lack skills. Because in 1980, the government decided workers don't deserve a share of the wealth they create. Fire them if they strike. Cut their wages. Eliminate their benefits. Tell them it's their fault. 45 years later, workers have nothing. Corporations have everything. And the system calls it success. But wage stagnation was only possible because corporations had unlimited power. The same power that crushed unions let them offshore millions of jobs. Because when workers can't organize and corporations face no regulation, what stops them from moving every factory to Mexico? 1985. General Electric announces it will close 11 factories in the United States, move them to Mexico and Asia. 25,000 workers lose their jobs. GE's CEO, Jack Welch, it's a $20 million bonus. This wasn't the first factory to leave, but it was the signal that the floodgates were open. Over the next 40 years, 70,000 factories will close. 5 million manufacturing jobs will vanish. And it all started with a choice made in 1980. Before Reagan, moving a factory overseas wasn't easy. Tariffs protected American workers. Trade agreements favored domestic production. Tax policy penalized offshoring. The government enforced a simple deal. If you want to sell to American consumers, you build in America. Reagan promised to end that deal, and he kept his promise. 1981. Reagan fires the air traffic controllers. 1982. He cuts corporate taxes. 1983. He begins negotiating free trade agreements. Each step removes a barrier. Each barrier removed makes offshoring easier. By 1985, corporations realize we can close American factories, move production to countries with $2 per day labor, and face no consequences. The race to the bottom begins. Here's how offshoring works. A company makes televisions in Ohio, pays workers $18 per hour, plus benefits, plus payroll taxes. Total cost per worker, $32 per hour. The same company can make televisions in Mexico for $2 per hour. No benefits, no unions, minimal safety regulations. The math is simple. Move the factory. Fire American workers. Hire Mexican workers. Profit margins triple. But moving factories required one more thing: eliminating the tax penalty. Before Reagan, if you moved a factory overseas, you paid the full U.S. corporate tax rate on those profits. Moving offshore didn't save you money on taxes. Reagan's tax reforms changed that. Corporations could defer taxes on offshore profits indefinitely, park billions in tax havens, pay nothing. Suddenly, offshoring wasn't just about cheap labor. It was about tax avoidance. And corporations moved everything they could. This is where it accelerates. 1986. Levi's closes its last factory in San Antonio. Moves to Costa Rica. 1988. RCA closes its television plant in Indiana. Moves to Mexico. 1989. Ford closes its truck plant in New Jersey. Moves production to Mexico. Each closure follows the same script. Announce the closure. Give workers 60 days notice. Offer no severance. Move the equipment overnight. Workers show up Monday morning to locked gates. Here's what offshoring looked like for real people. Tom, age 47, worked at a GM plant in Flint, Michigan for 23 years. Union job, $28 per hour, full benefits. Pension waiting at 62. In 1987, GM announces the plant will close, moving to Mexico. 3,000 workers lose their jobs. Tom is 47 years old, too young to retire, too old to retrain. He finds work at Walmart. $11 per hour, no benefits, no pension. He works until he dies at 71. His pension? Gone when GM declared bankruptcy in 2009. But offshoring wasn't just about manufacturing. By the 1990s, corporations realized they could offshore everything: customer service, data entry, accounting, software development. Any job that could be done on a computer could be moved to India, Philippines, Vietnam for 1/10 the cost. Here's the number that explains the devastation: 5 million. Between 1980 and 2020, America lost 5 million manufacturing jobs to offshoring. 5 million workers who made decent wages, had benefits, raised families on one income. Those jobs didn't disappear because of automation. They moved. The same products are still being made, just not here, just not by you. But here's what makes offshoring unforgivable. The companies that moved didn't pass savings to consumers. They kept them as profit. A television made in Ohio for $300, made in China for $50, sold to consumers for $300. The $250 difference? CEO bonuses and stock buybacks. Workers lost jobs. Consumers paid the same price. Corporations made billions, and the devastation wasn't just economic. When a factory closes, everything around it collapses. The diner across the street, the hardware store, the school, the tax base. Entire towns built around one factory die when the factory leaves. This is where it hits communities. Youngstown, Ohio, 1977. 40,000 people worked in steel mills. By 1995, zero. Every mill closed. Every job gone. Every business dependent on mill workers dead. The population drops by 60%. Property values collapse. Schools close. Crime soars. Today, Youngstown is a ghost town. This happened to hundreds of cities across the Rust Belt. Not because steel became obsolete, because corporations found cheaper labor overseas. But here's the defense corporations always use. We had no choice. We had to compete with foreign companies. That's a lie. Germany makes more manufactured goods today than in 1980. They didn't offshore. Japan manufactures more. They kept factories home. South Korea built an entire manufacturing economy without offshoring high-wage jobs. America was the only major economy that chose to hollow out its industrial base. Because American corporations prioritized short-term profits over long-term stability. And the political class helped them do it. 1993. President Bill Clinton signs NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. The promise: free trade will create jobs, lower prices, raise living standards. The result: 1 million jobs lost in 10 years. Wages down, trade deficit up, but corporate profits, record highs. Here's how NAFTA worked. Before NAFTA, moving a factory to Mexico meant paying tariffs on goods shipped back to the U.S. After NAFTA, no tariffs. Corporations could move factories to Mexico, pay workers $4 per day, ship products back to America tariff-free. It was designed to help corporations, not workers. And workers paid the price. 2001. China joins the World Trade Organization. The promise: opening trade with China will create American jobs. Chinese consumers will buy American goods. The result: 2 million more jobs lost. Factories closed across the Midwest. Trade deficit explodes. China doesn't buy American goods. America buys Chinese goods, made in factories that used to be in Ohio. Here's the theft in one number: $6 trillion. America's trade deficit between 2000 and 2020, $6 trillion. That's $6 trillion in goods America bought from other countries, but didn't sell back. $6 trillion that could have been American wages, American factories, American communities. Instead, it's profits for corporations that offshored production and sold back to American consumers. By 2010, the transformation is complete. Manufacturing that was 25% of the economy in 1980 is now 10%. Jobs that paid $60,000 with benefits are replaced by service jobs, paying $28,000 without benefits. Workers who made cars now serve coffee. Workers who made steel stock shelves. The American dream didn't evolve. It was offshored. And here's what breaks the promise. The politicians who signed the trade deals told workers, retrain, get new skills, adapt. But retrain for what? The new jobs paid half as much. required moving to new cities, offered no stability. A 50-year-old factory worker can't become a software engineer. The advice wasn't a solution. It was an insult. This is why your town is dying. The factory that employed 3,000 people closed in 1992. The tax base collapsed. The schools got worse. The hospital closed. The young people left. Now it's dollar stores and check cashing shops. Opioid addiction and despair. That's not because your town failed. It's because corporations abandoned it, and the government let them. But offshoring created one more disaster. When you destroy 5 million manufacturing jobs, where do those workers go? Service jobs, low-wage jobs. Jobs with no benefits, no unions, no future. Which meant, even if you kept your job, your wages got pushed down. Because 5 million desperate workers will take anything. This is why fast food workers can't negotiate higher pay. Why Walmart can pay $11 per hour and workers take it. Why Amazon warehouse workers pee in bottles. Because bathroom breaks cost too much time. Not because workers are weak. Because 5 million factory jobs vanished and created an ocean of desperate labor. When supply exceeds demand, price goes down, including the price of your labor. By 2025, the damage is irreversible. 70,000 closed factories, 5 million lost jobs, entire regions economically destroyed. And when workers in dying towns vote for politicians who promise to bring jobs back, they're called ignorant. But they're not ignorant. They watched their lives get destroyed by free trade agreements signed by people who promised prosperity. The betrayal was bipartisan. The consequences are permanent. This is why you can't find the kind of job your parents had. Your father worked in a factory for 30 years. Union job, pension, owned a house on one income. That factory is in Mexico now. You work 3 gig jobs. No union, no pension, no house. Not because you're less capable, because the system offshored your future. But offshoring was only possible because corporations faced no accountability. No penalties for closing factories. No taxes on offshore profits. No requirement to invest in workers. And when workers couldn't fight back because unions were destroyed, corporations became unstoppable. Which raises one question. What happens when corporations have unlimited power and workers have none? 2025. 45 years after Reagan fired the air traffic controllers. The average worker makes $50,000 per year. In 1980, adjusted for inflation, they made $50,000 per year. 45 years. Zero growth. But billionaires increased their wealth by 5,000%. This isn't an accident. This is the system working exactly as designed in 1980. Here's what 45 years of Reaganomics created. In 1980, the richest 1% owned 23% of all wealth. By 2025, they own 43%. The bottom 50% owned 3% in 1980. Today, they own 1%. 50% of Americans own 1% of everything. This is the triumph of 1980. But numbers don't capture what this feels like. Your parents bought a house at 25. You can't afford one at 35. Your parents had pensions. You have a 401k that crashes every decade. Your parents retired at 62. You'll die at your desk. That's not personal failure. That's systemic design. The system broke in 1980, and it never got fixed. Here's the direct line from 1980 to today. Reagan fires controllers. Corporations fire strikers. Unions collapse. Reagan cuts taxes on wealthy. Wages freeze. Inequality explodes. Reagan deregulates banks. Banks gamble. Economy crashes in 2008. Every crisis since 1980 follows the same script. Corporations take risks. Workers pay the price. And it started with one decision in August 1981. But the damage goes deeper than money. When work stops paying enough to live, people stop believing the system works. In 1980, 73% of Americans believed their children would be better off than they were. By 2025, 24% believe that. The American dream didn't fade. It was killed, deliberately. And everyone knows who killed it. This is where trust collapses. You work 2 jobs. Can't afford rent. Drown in student debt. Your boss makes 300 times what you make. Pays lower taxes. Gets bailouts when his company fails. You're told, work harder. Be more valuable. Stop complaining. But you're working harder than your parents did. And you have less. The lie becomes obvious. 2016. A reality TV star runs for president. Says the system is rigged. Says elites sold out workers. Says he'll bring back jobs. He wins. Not because voters are stupid. Because voters watched their towns die for 30 years, while politicians promised prosperity was coming. Reagan promised Trickle-Down would work. It didn't. Clinton promised NAFTA would create jobs. It didn't. Bush promised tax cuts would grow the economy. They didn't. Obama promised change. Nothing changed. Trump promised to burn it down. Half the country said, finally, someone honest. But Trump didn't fix anything. He cut taxes on corporations again. Deregulated banks again. Attacked unions again. Same playbook. Same results. Same people getting rich. Because the problem isn't one president. It's the system built in 1980. And no president since Reagan has challenged it. This is why politics feels broken. Democrats and Republicans fight over everything except the one thing that matters. Who gets the money? Both parties take corporate donations. Both parties cut taxes for the rich. Both parties refuse to strengthen unions. They disagree on social issues. They agree on economic policy. And economic policy determines everything else. Here's the pattern that explains American politics since 1980. Republicans cut taxes on wealthy, explode deficits, blame government spending. Democrats take office, stabilize economy. Don't reverse tax cuts. Don't rebuild unions. Republicans take office again. Cut more taxes. Deficits explode again. Repeat for 45 years. Workers never recover. Corporations always win. The game is rigged. Both parties know it. Neither will fix it. By 2020, the consequences become impossible to ignore. 40% of Americans can't afford a $400 emergency expense. 78% live paycheck to paycheck. 64% say they couldn't retire even if they wanted to. This is the richest country in history. And most people are one crisis away from bankruptcy. That's not natural. That's the result of decisions made in 1980. And then COVID hits. March 2020. The economy shuts down. Unemployment hits 14% overnight. Congress sends $1,200 checks to workers. $600 per week for unemployment. The money runs out in months. But corporations? They get $3 trillion. No strings attached. Stock market crashes in March. Recovers by June. Hits record highs by December. Workers lose jobs. Billionaires gain $1.8 trillion. The same playbook from 2008. The same playbook from 1980. This is where the system reveals itself completely. A pandemic kills 1 million Americans. Shuts down the economy. Crashes the stock market. And billionaires get richer. How is that possible? Because the government prints money and gives it to corporations. Corporations buy back stock. Stock prices rise. Billionaires own the stock. You get laid off. They get richer. Using government money. The system isn't broken. It's working perfectly. But COVID exposed something else. Essential workers. The people who kept society running during lockdown. Grocery workers. Delivery drivers. Warehouse workers. Nurses. Teachers. They risked their lives. worked mandatory overtime, kept the country alive. And they were paid poverty wages. Amazon made $440 billion in 2020, gave workers a $2 per hour hazard bonus for 3 months. Jeff Bezos made $70 billion in 2020, could have given every Amazon worker $50,000 and still gained money. He didn't, because the system doesn't reward essential workers. It rewards capital. This is the legacy of 1980. Work doesn't matter. Only ownership matters. You can work 60 hours per week, risk your life, keep society functioning. You'll stay poor, because the person who owns the company you work for takes everything you create, and the government protects that arrangement. By 2025, the pattern is undeniable. Every economic crisis ends the same way. Corporations get bailouts. Workers get nothing. Every recovery benefits the wealthy. Workers stay flat. Every promise of trickle-down economics proves false, and still nothing changes. Because changing the system requires challenging power, and power writes the rules. This is why your generation can't afford what your parents had. Not houses, not health care, not education, not retirement. Your parents had all of those things because unions forced companies to share profits. Unions died in 1980. Companies kept the profits. You got debt. Here's the number that proves the theft. $50 trillion. Between 1975 and 2018, $50 trillion in wealth shifted from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. $50 trillion. That's $400,000 per working family. Your family is $400,000 poorer than you would be if the system hadn't changed in 1980. That's not your failure. That's organized theft over 45 years. And here's what makes it unforgivable. It didn't have to happen. Other countries didn't do this. Germany has strong unions, workers sharing profits. Inequality stayed flat. France has strong labor laws. Workers have 6 weeks vacation. Retirement at 62. Canada has universal health care. College costs $4,000 per year. Minimum wage is $15. America chose differently, not because other systems don't work, because American corporations wanted all the money. And in 1980, they got permission to take it. This is what Reagan's revolution created. A country where 3 people own more wealth than the bottom 50% combined. A country where working full-time doesn't lift you out of poverty. A country where corporations pay no taxes and workers pay 25%. A country where billionaires fly to space while teachers work second jobs. This isn't capitalism. This is oligarchy, and it was built in 1980. But the system can't last forever. You can't suppress wages for 45 years without consequences. You can't transfer $50 trillion upward without breaking the social contract. You can't tell 3 generations they'll be poorer than their parents without rage building. Something has to give. The signs are everywhere. Young people graduating with debt they'll never repay. Workers living in cars because rent takes 70% of their paycheck. Families choosing between medicine and food. Retirees working at 75 because Social Security isn't enough. This isn't sustainable. This is a system eating itself. And when the next crisis comes, and it will come, the playbook won't work anymore. You can't bail out corporations again when half the country can't afford food. You can't print trillions for banks when teachers are on food stamps. You can't ask workers to sacrifice again when billionaires paid 0 in taxes. The math doesn't work. The patience is gone. The trust is destroyed. This is the reckoning. 45 years of Reaganomics created the richest country in history where most people are poor. 45 years of union busting created a workforce with no power and no future. 45 years of trickle-down created a flood upward and a drought below. The promise was prosperity for everyone. The reality is oligarchy. And here's the question no one wants to ask. How long can you tell workers they're worthless while corporations are priceless before the workers stop playing along? How long can you promise a dream while delivering a nightmare before people demand something different? How long can you transfer all the wealth to the top before the bottom refuses to hold up the system? Not much longer. 45 years ago, Reagan fired 11,000 workers and declared war on the American middle class. The middle class lost. Corporations won, and they've been winning ever since. But victories built on theft don't last forever. The bill always comes due, and 45 years later, the bill is coming due. What happens next depends on whether Americans remember what they lost in 1980, and whether they're willing to fight to get it back.